must a man walk down before they call him a man? How many seas must a white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand?
Hi, welcome back to the Absolute Human Podcast. I'm Jag.
And this is Sonia.
And today we're going to be talking about speaking up.
Tell us.
Well, there's a lot of things happening right now, and we're looking at the news and we're watching all the stuff happening. And I think as Canadians, a lot of times we believe that it doesn't really affect us. That racism doesn't exist in Canada.
It's another country problem.
Well, even that word, I think a lot of people have just probably, who are listening, don't, we kind of numb out when we hear that word, that it doesn't really affect us or it doesn't really mean anything to us. But it does. If one person is affected, we all get affected. And it's something about our integrity and our own harmony that we need to speak up.
Yes.
It is no longer okay for people to be non-sexist or non-racist. You actually have, I think it's time everyone has to be anti-sexist, anti-racist, anti-gay oppression, really just to reclaim our integrity fully.
Right.
So that's what we're talking about today, just a light topic. Welcome. I'm so glad you guys showed up because it's so good, and it's so good that you're here, and it's so good that you're listening. And I know it's not easy, but this is probably the most important thing that we all have to look at. All those foods that you have and the herbs you use and everything else that you do to take care of yourself and to make yourself healthy and good is great, and they pale in comparison to looking at the way we all suffer.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't look at these oppressions and we don't look at the ways we can stand up against injustices that happen to everyone on the planet, we will always suffer. We will always be stagnated. We need to find our voice.
Yes.
So we are talking today about speaking up and a little information too about why this is important.
Right. Yeah, this is absolutely important in talking about racism. Of course, we are referring to the riots that have been happening the last few days against the murder of George Floyd by a cop. And it harkens back, of course, to the Black Lives Matter movement, but it is so much more than that. It's almost like finally, like the powder keg has just exploded on everything, and you can really see how.
And people are talking, and my Facebook is flooded with people of color posting stuff.
Yeah,
and then a really good group of white people too who are posting stuff too.
Yes.
But there's a lot of people going quiet.
Yes.
This is not a time to be quiet.
No. And, a lot of times we talk about in health, especially in emotional health, like when we cannot express our feelings, what that does to our body.
Right.
This is that, but on a much more global scale.
Right.
Right. And you always talk about how if your physical health isn't tied in with, let's say, our social health, then there really is.
They're
what's
married
the point?
together.
They are married together.
Yes.
If one
your
suffers.
Social awareness is completely tied to your individual liberation. It cannot happen one way or the other. Closing your eyes and meditating is not going to take you there.
Mm-hmm.
It might spiritually bypass a few feelings for us, but we are part of a community. We are all in this together. We actually are. And the more that we actually start to realize that and get to speak up and actually notice how good we are, the better.
Absolutely.
And I think that one of the biggest reasons why we don't speak up is we feel bad about ourselves. We don't know how to do it. oh, should I do it this way or should I do it that way? And every way that you feel bad about yourself buys into the society that actually wants you to feel bad. So you can shop more and smoke more and drink more and distract yourself more and more and make yourself sick.
Yep, and not notice what's happening around you,
Right.
especially in terms of oppression.
Right.
And you say, of course, that we are in this together, but we are not affected by it in the same way,
No.
let's say.
Very differently. So what about how are people affected differently?
Right. I'm glad that you asked me, because a lot of the data that's coming out of the States is showing how people of color across the US are becoming more infected.
Yeah, and COVID, right?
And die from COVID more than
Anyone else.
than anyone else.
Right.
So one example, which I think a lot of us have heard maybe in the last month or so, is the case of Chicago.
Right.
And the mayor there was revealing that the Black residents account for 72% of the deaths
Whoa.
in the city, while just making up 30% of the city's population.
Wow.
Yeah. So 52% of the positive deaths, positive tests, and 72% of the deaths.
Wow.
And of course, we know that is happening not only there, but in cities like New Orleans, Detroit, Baltimore, where there is a higher population of people of color. New York, for example, as well too,
Right.
in terms of Hispanic people and Black people.
Right.
It's hitting people of color communities harder than anyone else.
Right, and this is systemic racism, right? Systemic. So there's a difference between structural and individual racism. This is something I just read that I'll read. It is structural and embedded into all aspects of this society. This includes laws, dominant cultural norms, and our very own consciousness. The actions of Amy Cooper and the police officers in Minneapolis occur within contexts and histories of power and privilege. While social and professional consequences for their individual behaviors are absolutely essential, we also need to understand how individual acts of racism are a reflection of systemic racism.
Yes.
That's why it is important to speak up against laws and the way systemic racism continues to create poverty in certain people of color.
Yeah, and even the Centers of Disease Control in the States notices this, and they talked about some factors that did lead to why there was a disproportionate, why we're seeing these numbers in people of color. So things like minorities typically live in more densely populated areas, and even the institutionalized racism of residential housing
Right.
would lead to that. So how can you socially distance when you live in and amongst so many people?
Right.
So further from that, typically there's not a lot of grocery stores or quality medical care in
Right.
these communities. If you do get sick, you'd have to travel a lot farther, or you just don't have access.
Right.
And also a lot of generational households are
Right.
seen in communities of color,
Right.
as opposed to, with the opposite, where you can just, live by yourself and
Right.
not have,
Have a big house, sit by yourself,
Right.
all alone in it,
yeah,
and be really happy sitting all by yourself.
right. So,
But that's what the way racism and classism has been set up, is that it creates a lot of isolation for people on the top.
mm-hmm.
And this is it's hard to tell people. It's not hard to tell people. It's hard for people to listen to why working on racism or ending racism is good for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
There's a privilege. Everyone carries a certain privilege. We carry different privileges in different classes. Like, obviously, on the highest socioeconomic class in the world is white people, and they carry a lot of privilege for economic power.
Yes.
But there is a lot, like with communities of color, maybe the poorest people in the world, they have a sense of community that is a great privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certain privileges of culture and certain privileges of music in certain cultures.
Yes.
So everyone carries a certain privilege.
Right.
We're just addressing this certain privilege to be aware of it. It's sometimes hard to notice and the negative aspects of this privilege.
Yes.
Right? The negative aspects of it is the isolation and the places where you don't really connect with everyone. You sit in a house, a big house.
It's easy not to see what's going on around you.
Well, it's easy to be
or
detached.
in the world. Yeah.
It's easy to be suffering.
Right.
The more isolated, the more alone you are, the more you believe that crap that's going on in your head.
Yes.
The more you actually buy into all those thoughts. The thing around being around a lot of people all the time is they tell you how stupid you are and goofy you are.
They can pull you out of your own
Ego.
Yes, that's
Right?
the word.
Yeah. That's why I always tell, like, you know, if women come in and they have a man and they're dating a man, and I always say, does the man have friends? Because if he doesn't have friends, there's a problem.
Look out. You might have to be doing a little bit more work there.
Yeah, because men need to be around men too. You know, men
Yeah.
need to be, you know, taking away their ego. A lot of times they can just be, you know, caught in their own head.
Yes.
And men get isolated very, very easily. So back to this. Back to the easy topic of systemic and cultural racism.
And how it's affecting the health of a lot of people
Yes.
out there. And this is not new, but COVID-19 is certainly drawing a lot of attention to the historical chain of events and what it has, what's been the foundation of it coming to this point. So like you said, we do have to address the systemic inequalities that are already there in terms of having more people of color as healthcare providers, more
What do you mean healthcare providers? All the doctors are brown anyways.
Right, but I'm talking specifically about
African-American?
African Americans, or even in
Yes,
Canada,
Native.
the Indigenous
Yes. Okay.
culture as well too.
Right.
That there needs to be more representation of those groups to understand what is happening a little bit more clearer
Right.
to start with.
Right.
Yeah, just even the representation.
Yeah.
And then having laws and policies that can actually clearly, that are coming from those groups that can actually clearly identify what's needed, as opposed to the colonizers, I'll say, making those rules and policies for others.
Right. That's a great idea.
It is a great idea. I mean, things are changing. However, they need to
Yes,
keep changing a lot more.
And they need to be moved on an individual basis. Think people need to like individually look in their own lives where they carry out these patterns. We all carry it out. We're all that way. We all have patterns of racism. We all carry patterns of prejudices and
Yes.
confusions. We
Yes.
all do.
Yep.
But it's time we step up and speak up
Right.
and interrupt it.
Yes.
Every time I made a commitment a long time ago, about 25 years ago, around there, to not let anything go by that is either sexist, racist, or any kind of way oppressive in any conversation. And I do it to the detriment of everybody involved and make everybody uncomfortable. I will speak up every time. And I'll tell you, the first time it was hard. I was in a comedy club. Well, it was probably one of the first times in a comedy club. And the person said, and it was packed. It was like 300 people there. And the person said, and those ragheads.
Ooh.
And as a Sikh person, I know what ragheads mean.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it means people with turbans. And I said, whoa.
Okay.
It's the first thing you say when somebody says something oppressive.
Mm.
Whoa.
Whoa.
That's it. Just start with that. And I said, whoa. And then everybody got uncomfortable and got quiet. Then he said it again. And I said, whoa. And it made everybody like feel totally uncomfortable and shameful and confused. And he started, looking at me. And I said, I'm going to keep saying whoa if you keep saying that.
Yeah.
And I'm going to interrupt you every single time you say that.
Right.
And then he started to turn, and everybody started to turn on me, and he was saying stuff like, Why? Were you teased in school?
Uh,
And I said, yeah, I was.
yes.
And then he said something else, and I just would not let it go. And everybody turned on me, but it only took another 3-4 minutes, and he went running off the stage.
Way to go.
Yeah, I mean, everybody in that room felt totally uncomfortable, and I felt great.
And no one's ever going to forget that moment.
No.
Everyone
they
in that
should-
room.
They should feel shame
Yes.
for letting that go.
Yeah.
It's not okay, no matter where it is, in a comedy club or wherever it is.
Right.
Oppression is not okay, especially with word.
No. And as hard as it is to model that,
Yeah.
the liberation that you got at that moment, carries through to this day, and it carries through in your work and your commitment to ending all types of oppression.
Begin with whoa.
That's a good one. Start with whoa.
That's all you got to do is start with whoa.
We can.
Then you can catch yourself and think of what you want to say.
Right.
You might have to say whoa 2 or 3 times. And why is this important? Why should people do this? Why is this important?
Well, it's important just for speaking your truth,
Yes.
and of course I want to live in a world where I can trust myself almost, that, yeah, I can go out and exist in a way that has some sort of purpose and meaning, where I'm not adding to the suffering
Right.
of others.
Yeah. I think we need to make a commitment, all of us, to taking action every time racism or sexism or any kind of oppression shows up in front of us, no matter how small or large the incident. This will flush out from undercover all the things where we tend to go numb,
Oh, yeah.
and it will bring up our integrity.
Right.
And there's no way towards any kind of spiritual, physical, mental liberation without integrity.
Right.
This is the beginning of harmony. Speak up.
Social awareness is tied into our physical health. And like you said earlier, Jug, about how all the acupuncture and herbs and good foods are great. But if we're just doing that for ourselves, I would want to quit what I do,
Right.
because it's not about us. It's about our relation and our interconnectedness with everything else on the planet. If our bodies are clear and strong, then we can act and behave and show up in a way that reflects that, instead of, going quiet and hoarding
Right on.
hoarding that.
So, speak up.
Say whoa.
Say whoa. Don't go quiet. It will serve you and everyone else.
It's bad for your health.
Thanks for joining us here on Absolute Human Podcast. I'm Jag.
And this is Sonia.
We'll hear from you next time.
Bye, everybody.